who they are, who they're with, and a little bit about their background, so you have context as to who you want to ask a question to, if it's someone specific. We'll just start with questions right away. So start thinking of them. I know you've got one that you posted online that you wanted. So yeah, here we go.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jason Stoddard of Brew Lab. Oh wait, no, actually, bring some with you? No, sorry, I didn't bring enough for everyone. Shit Audio. I'm one of the founders with Mike. We make a bunch of fairly inexpensive stuff to some fairly expensive-er stuff. You probably have heard of us. So.
I'm Mike. Same company. He's mostly animal. Same shit, different guy.
But you
digital
remember your shirts. Yeah.
Digital, analog.
Yeah.
Dan Clark, founder of Mr. Speakers, and we make headphones, not speakers.
Was Mr. Headphones taken?
Yes, that was it. Mr. Headphones was taken by a retailer in the Philippines who wouldn't sell the name. There you go.
Really?
Yeah, really.
Yeah, Thorsten Lösch, AMR and Hi-Fi Audio. We make all sorts of hi-fi equipment, the little accessories. You probably have heard of us. If not, don't worry, you will.
Bonjour, Nicolas from Focal. So we manufacture basically speakers and headphones. So.
Okay, and with that, who wants the first question? Go.
Do you gentlemen think it is possible to do an audio mix using just headphones? Or does it require speakers as well? Just an interesting thought.
Anything's possible. I have a number of producers who work for me in my company. Most of the actual people who do the construction and test of our products are DJs and musicians and producers. And they mostly mix on headphones now. Because they've become so familiar with it, and they also know how that translates to the big PA systems and sound systems their stuff gets used on. We get occasional questions about it from people, but not too often.
Anyone else have any thoughts about that?
Basically, we do have a range of studio monitors as well at Focal, so we have some engineers using both. I tend to agree with Dan at some point. Some engineers now can mix on headphones. However, when it comes to panning, well, I mean, it's positioning all the instruments on the stereo imaging. Obviously, that's mainly the limitation of headphones. It's super convenient when you don't know the room where you are in order to check what is the proper bass behavior of your mix. But in terms of stereo imaging, it's always a bit more tricky.
Well, actually, there's also another angle to this. You can use either digital domain or analog domain, I would say, undistorting the space presentation for headphones from a speaker-based recording. That is still not very well done. We have our own system on that, which is analog. SPL have a really good take on it that I like, but it's not that easy to use, but it's very professional. And it is possible to get close to a point where you actually can also pan on headphones and do things. Yep. We are still working on this. The more we perfect this, I think eventually it will be possible, and we're already a long way towards this.
There are technologies now that allow you to listen to fairly convincing surround sound through headphones. DTS headphones, one, Smythe Research. Another. As a headphone designer, would you design headphones differently if they were intended to be used primarily for listening to surround sound as opposed to?
I don't think so. There have been experiments made where people tried putting multiple drivers in and creating arrays and stuff, but due to the wavelengths involved, there's just so much issue with that, and then you have to get into so much DSP, at which point, you might as well just do DSP that assumes two good transducers that have pretty linear phase and a pretty linear frequency response. And then the simulation software that I've heard some pretty compelling examples. I've walked into one demo where we we watched sequences on, you know, some pretty good quality monitors, and then we switched over to headphones, and we were comparing the placement and positioning, and this stuff's gotten pretty accurate. And so I think that, you know, it's always been the position I've had that that DSP makes good headphones great, or great headphones just extraordinary. It will also do lots of good things for lesser gear. But at the end of the day, I think having a good transducer simply lets you do more with whatever the front end is.
Could you please stand?
Sure. So speaking of space and kind of soundstage and imaging, I was kind of wondering, when designing whether it's an amp or DAC or accessory products like the iPurifier or other things, iPower, or headphones, how does the soundstage come into play? Like how is it put into a headphone? Like you can listen to speakers and you can get the sense of air and space, and then you can listen to headphones, and sometimes you can get it, sometimes you can't. Sometimes when you switch out DACs, sometimes you can get that effect. DSP options also kind of also give you that effect. So would it be like the driver angling, or would it be more of a frequency response thing, or is it something way more complicated like noise?
How long is a piece of string?
That's a big question.
There's just 500,000 variables that all play into it.
I don't know. I guess for me, I had somebody actually ask me a question today, which was, he said, what happened between ether and ether flow because the sound of your headphones changed so much? And the answer that I gave was I began to hear and understand how to turn Soundstage into my tuning and voicing. But it's still not a science in any exact way for us. There are certain variables we know affect it, but there are other things we're like, well, why did that affect it? I have no idea. And for us, it's a combination of trying to apply the science we've developed or other people have done through some, you know, there's lots of interesting research out there. And occasionally just trying some crazy experiments and seeing, you know, if we can tease it even further. Because one of the things with headphones that I always found was hardest was to keep it from making 3 lobes and to try and get continuity between them and have an even uniform sense of fill all the way around. And that's just really, really difficult.
Yeah, on the amp side, I think that's a lot easier because essentially what we're trying to do is as little harm as possible, maintain separation. That's easy. People do go into the soundstage of amps, and there are differences even through headphones, which actually it's a lot harder to tell a soundstage difference on a headphone than a speaker system. There are differences. I actually don't know why. I suspect it has something to do with actually at least minor frequency response variations and some distortion profiles, but it's going to be relatively minor on the amp side. It's like choose the best, you know, headphone that you want, and then work on the amps, and then maybe your digital filter plays into that a bit, but that's more on the speaker side.
On the DAC side, most of them, in fact all of them now with the common delta sigma shifts even have DSP involved. Assuming an optimized recording, and optimized means time domain, which is really phase response. But if you assume an optimized recording, there are things that you can do in the digital domain which are not commonly done. All right, all of the common DSP designs use zero phase designs, which means they don't change the phase of anything coming through. There are also time domain optimized filters, which make the time domain actually physically more accurate. There are frequency domain accurate filters as well, but that's virtually all of them. So we have a filter that optimizes both, and I feel that makes quite a difference in imaging. But then again, it depends upon the rest of the system, primarily the transducers.
Yeah. How long is the string? That was great.
Yeah,
that was great.
Yeah.
I mean, just perhaps to put into this a few of my experiences. One thing I found is adding a lot of second harmonic distortion can give an impression of a much bigger sound stage. Using a very long digital filter can give the impression of something more spacious, like the space opens up. But that's not necessarily accurate to the recording. So now we are asking, what do we want? Do we want high fidelity to the original recording? Do we want what we like? I'm all for what I like. I want what I like. I don't give a damn about fidelity insofar that I'm saying you can turn it all off and you can listen to it as pure as you like, but I like to do things so I get what I like. And I like to give our customers the options to say, you know, I like this, and you don't like it, turn it off. Or load the firmware that doesn't have it. It's okay. You don't have to like it. You should like what you like, and you should have what you like.
I like the 3D plus.
Thank you.
Digitally, it's a matter of statistics, and that is, you do the greatest possible good for the greatest possible situations. And you know, but nothing is right for everybody. There's no such thing as one size fits all. Oh.
So, Jean-Pierre. Nicolas, I'm sorry. Focal was a premium, world-famous speaker manufacturer for a long, long time. And they got into the headphones 5 years ago or something like that. And I'm interested in knowing, within your corporate engineering culture, what was your initial expectations of the difficulty in your ability to succeed in manufacturing headphones, and what is your current sense of what it's like to manufacture headphones, and how, and relative to speakers, what kind of an engineering challenge is it?
Well, for us, the most challenging part was obviously to be able to reproduce what we do with speakers. Usually, let's put it that way. You know, get an example with the three-way speakers, so tweeter, mid-range, and bass driver. To get all of that through one full-range driver. So that was basically the core challenge of it, because here you are asking one same piece of driver to take care of the entire audio spectrum, which was something totally new to us. We had other background on that, but that was something very, very unique, and this is part of the reason why we spend a fair amount of time designing and researching ideas and so on, and bearing in mind that we wanted to get this approach in terms of the sensation you have when you listen to speakers, but in a pair of headphones. So we went for super open electrodynamic drivers with many, many different technologies inside. But yeah, that was the core challenge, I would say.
But I guess my question really is, in the beginning, were you so cocky that you thought, hey, we can make a pair of headphones no problem, and now you went, holy smoke, was that harder than we expected? Or am I just wrong?
No, we knew what would be the challenges already, because we did, I'm not gonna go too deep into secrets, but we knew already, because we did a lot of research phase way before that. I'm talking about now 10 years ago, what would be needed in order to achieve what we wanted. And to cut a long story short, the very first driver took 4 years in terms of R&D. When I mean R&D, it's research development and also the manufacturing process. So because we developed also all the machines to manufacture the entire driver, be it the dome and so on.
Well, I'm glad you didn't underestimate it. You did a great job, so thanks for
Thank you.
By my count, there are at least 9 different ways you can terminate a headphone cable, because there's so many different ways of inputting. Now, normally I would drive me crazy, but adapters are pretty easy to come by to allow you to connect different headphone amps. The problem's at the other end. It seems like for every headphone manufacturer, there's a different connector at the headphone, which means that if you want to invest in high-end headphone cables, it's going to be very pricey if you have a large collection. Is there any technical reason why you can't design headphone cables so that you can use different adapters to allow you to use those third-party cables with different headphones? And is there any reason why one is superior to the other? Can you guys just kind of settle on one? So it would make life so much easier. So
I couldn't agree more, but I also, it's such a difficult thing. So could you make adapters at this end? Well, one of the issues you run into, if you try to make an adapter and it's just like a plug into a plug, is you have to then have this big, huge thing that's hanging down right here, and it's going to be banging into your shoulders. So then you have to move it down here, or all the way down to the bottom of the cable, at which point you've just made a new cable. So there isn't really a practical solution I'm aware of up here. If somebody has one, it'd be genius level stuff to figure it out and make a little product. The other thing, trying to get into vendors to standardize. Like when we came into the market, there were no standards at all. There were custom connectors that had been invented for the HD650s and a different connector for the 800s.
you don't even have standardization within the same company and within the same product.
Well, we do.
Right? Well, you do, but you're an exception.
Yeah, well, see, that's one of the things is, like, for us, we're kind of locked into it because once I made the commitment to do this, I was going to ensure that every connector on every headphone was compatible. Otherwise, people would be very upset with us, right? And so now that's what we have.
We like confusing people.
No, and we have a secret agreement with cable manufacturers to make sure to add more so they can make more adapters and sell more. No, that's a joke. No, but it's really difficult. Like, for example, for us on the amp termination, we've suggested the most common sense connector for a portable is 3.5mm TRRS. There's no two ways about it.
Thank you.
Because in this case, you basically just use something that's there. You use it slightly differently, but there's all the infrastructure. Everything exists. Of course, there are people who prefer mini XLRs. Sony naturally has to come up with what is really a good idea, a great solution. When we try to integrate it into our new products, we just couldn't get the connectors. Now we can, so we're starting to put it in because we've got demand. But in the end, it's this, and I think there's something that we as an industry can do better. There's always kind of a distrusty motive of others. Oh, they're promoting this. No, I'm not going to go this. I may be seen this way. And I think this is something. We've discussed this with Jude back then, the balanced connectors and everything. He said, yeah, it's going to be Sony Pentacon. Well, Jude, no, still not. It may be, but the Chinese now have their own version of the 3.5mm TRS. It's going to be confusion reigning continuous. And I hate this as much as you hate it as customer. As a manufacturer, for us, it's a nightmare.
Yeah, we get stuck having to make cables for almost every termination because we try to actually make a cable that somebody can use when they get the headphone. And it's like if we just shipped a 1/4 inch or an XLR or 2 low quality ones, then we're just putting garbage in the box.
Dan, you gave some thought, I guess, to deciding what connector to use. I mean, you think that there are some connectors that are sonically superior at the headphone, and not at the other end? Is it?
Well, sure, of course. There's always differences in the design quality, the construction, the reliability. We've actually, I'm really glad we picked these connectors because the reason we picked them was they don't stick out as far as mini XLRs, and so the cable can drape at a more natural angle, so you're not projecting weight. So that was a good design choice, and they've been super stable. The only ones I've ever seen damaged were when somebody clearly stood up very hard and very fast and literally bent the plugs, both flattened them out on the tops. But other than that, they've never had a failure. And so, reliability like that is fantastic because the last thing you want is cable problems.
I don't know. I don't know why we just didn't stick with 2 3-pin XLRs. So. That's an old joke. We have to take a while to get that one.
So I'll organize a meeting with one of our designers, and he will explain you.
Yeah. I know why we don't stick with that.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, part of the headphones design is also to make very nice product, and at some point, that's the reason why you have some small connectors that exist. Others are bigger in terms of, let's say, to offer more quality and solutions like the locking mechanism on the XLR or Limo or whatever.
Yeah, by the way, I think the 4.4 is great. It's my favorite of the portable connectors now. You know, I'm glad somebody did it. It's tough, it's positive locking, you can hold a heavy player by it.
No, Sony fell for the old thing. A lot of engineers have seen this cartoon where it's like, oh, you know, everyone gets together, so we have 12 different standards. You need one standard to rule them all. And they come out with it. Now I got 13 standards. That's the problem.
And, well, another situation is that it would take time and effort from some person to get together with all the manufacturers and sell them and convince them that any one given design would be the best. And that would be
good luck.
Yeah, good luck. Exactly. You couldn't pay them enough money because it's like herding hamsters.
Mike has no opinions, though, so you go with whatever.
Yeah, you'd be the
you'd
be the ideal broker.
Yeah, right. It's like, it's just not going to happen.
I guess my question is about measurements and what you hear and measuring the unmeasurable. There's a lot of things, there's a lot of products out there that measure really, really well and sound awful. There's a lot of products out there that measure so-so and sound really, really pretty good. What are we not measuring? What are we not, what is missing? What are we not measuring that makes the difference?
Well, I would chime in at the beginning. If we knew, we would have a complete, objective set of measurements that everybody in the industry would know that we had to adhere to so that all of our products could sound at their best. 40 years ago, TIM, transient intermodulation distortion, was an issue. And there were low TIM designs that, again, some of them sounded great. Some of them sounded just, it knocked the fillings out of your teeth. So it's the answer is we don't know.
Yeah, it's like we try to figure it out. And I mean, measurements are hugely valuable. And in fact, we just released measurements on Modi 3 and then the Modi multibed, for the first time. And these are 21-page AP reports. These 21-page AP reports are not complete in any way. They're one sample rate. I don't think they're two sample rates. But the thing is, I mean, you'd end up with literally 150 to 300-page report, to actually accurately cover every input, every permutation, everything, that the AP can measure. And the thing is, a lot of people, they look at one page of that and go, oh, this is wrong. Look at this. This is horrible. It's the worst thing on the planet. It's like, well, what about the other 300 pages? How does that actually correlate? And why are we not measuring things, more vigorously, like multitone distortion, which we found probably correlates better, but it's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. I have some designs that work great on multitone and sound horrible, and then they don't make it to market. But it seems like there might be a little bit of correlation there.
I think we need to understand where actually what we nowadays call standard measurements, how this developed. Generally, what happened is somebody wanted to sell a product. They took some number because people like a good number. THD, I can give you 0.00000% distortion. Who wants more distortion than that? Nobody will say, no, but I want more distortion. I will actually say it. But the point is, then the next step comes, someone says, well, we need to make this repeatable. We need to make this fair. It's used in advertising. So then this comes in. The only thing, nobody has ever proven any correlation of those measurements with sound quality. In other words, we have something which is driven by marketing and by the need to have a scientific basis to sell a product that has never got any scientific basis. any more than ABX testing. Nowadays, it's considered that audio is a solved problem. It's something, there's no longer any serious fundamental research done. That was done 50 years ago. It's done, it's dusted, it's no longer a problem. Monetize it, sell it. That's the mainstream. And we know it isn't true. It is not a solved problem. It has been only solved to the first iteration, to the first instance. And to then come to the point where we say, what are we not measuring? Or actually anything important, and to make it measurable, we would have to invent new equipment, new methods. And we're really starting to run into this. Even Focal, relatively speaking, who are probably the biggest here on the table, they are a small company next to, let's say, Intel or Apple.
That's for sure.
We would need companies on that level. Not even Harman is big enough. Although they do a lot of good research, but they are very limited too. We would have to have a huge amount of input in this, and none of those companies will do it because they say, audio? Come on, that's got solved 50 years ago. Let's just sell it.
No, and there is also, back to your question, something very important to understand. If you said, I think, beginning of your question was, we may have two different products with almost the same measurements. You are referring to frequency response curve?
Or no.
No.
Pick one, pick 5.
Right.
You know, take an amplifier with 0.1% THD and a sloppy frequency response of plus or minus 3 dB, which nobody should care about.
Yeah.
And little phase shifting here and there and sort of things, but it sounds like it's accurate. Versus, I think personally, I think of my first exposure to Class D, and it was, the immediate thought was, what is wrong with this? And I didn't know it was Class D. I just knew it was a small, high-powered amplifier.
Yeah, and part of this is probably due also to the fact that here you are looking at a picture, because most of the measurements are a picture of something at a very specific timing, right?
Yes.
We do have in the audio industry some very interesting measurements, like waterfall frequency response curve, where you can see what's going on in the time domain as well. Right. And that has a huge impact. The problem is to look at those curves and to understand the measurements take hours, days, or even more. But the time domain is very important. That's what I wanted to add.
Yeah, I would second that. The time domain is just greatly overlooked. Everybody, we got the AP.
Yeah,
it's all time domain.
And
the what happens in the time domain is just crucial.
Yeah. No, that definitely. We've got a lot of overlooked factors, and putting this systematically. I mean, people like the Audio Engineering Society should actually be behind this and should support efforts to systematize it more, but there is a very strong objectivist stream there which says, well, you can't hear it. It's not possible to hear this. And all of us here at this table, we say, yeah, no, but we can. Yeah. And all of this is so, it's what it is, and I don't think it will change.
If you could design by measurements, everything would pretty much sound the same.
And everything would sound awesome.
Yeah. And there'd be no. We use design primarily to find errors, sometimes to figure out what we've done particularly right or wrong as a differential analysis tool, and then for manufacturing to make sure things are repeatable and identical, insofar as we know how to do that. And that's, for us, measurement's not a design tool in that sense. It always has to come after we listen. My partner in design always is a little driven crazy by the fact that I won't put anything on the rack until I've listened.
Yeah, it's just a reference point, and that's it.
Okay. And another major point is this is not a conspiracy theory. But the AES is influential in those who would make ICs, chips, that are used in audio frequency design that are very common to the entire industry. They're very cookbook. Virtually anyone that could read a data sheet could make a D to A converter if they really applied themselves. And the current wisdom in audio, as has been hinted here, is that it's all solved. We've got it all taken care of for you. All you need to do is purchase these parts, and all of the wisdom of the AES will be immediately made available for you in a DAC or a digital component that you might design.
Run the reference design and just go with it. Yeah, and it's funny because I don't think despite the AES, I don't think I've ever met any engineer actually working in audio, in an audio company, who isn't a subjectivist. I mean, please, contradict me if I'm wrong, but I've never met someone who says, oh, I can't hear the difference between things and it doesn't matter.
Well, I guess I think, sorry, I'm taking too much time.
No. It's, actually, what it is we need you to speak into the mic. So
Okay.
Well, I'm going to utter a dirty word because the story behind it is worth mentioning. That when the engineers who designed MP3 were designing MP3, they made all sorts of tweaks to it, and then it wouldn't pass the Suzanne Vega test. When I gave her voice through it, it sounded like crap. And they kept on working it until Suzanne Vega's voice sounded right. And that was one of their reference points.
It's interesting if you play most compressed audio schemes and then separate out that which was lost in compression.
Yes.
And then play it back on its own. You're amazed at the amplitude out of it, and how much has been taken out.
Yeah, and actually, if you're talking very low rate audio codecs like they use in telephony, the only way they really evaluate those is typically not by measurement, it's subjective. It's typically a panel, and it's subjective panel.
Can you understand what was said?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is it intelligible?
And is it pleasing?
Yeah.
Because there's pleasing and intelligent. Yeah.
And pleasing-ish.
Yeah.
Both of us.
Yeah. It's all subjective, right?
Yeah.
So since this is a headphone panel, I thought I'd ask about two things that I think are related. One is I understand that everyone's ear canal is different.
Quite a bit.
So how do you design for that? Is question one. And related to it is there's a couple of companies out there now that are making headphones that have a testing unit in them, and you press a button and it does these tones, and when you hear the tone you press the button again, and that provides sort of fingerprint or earprint for the headphones to make it reverse whatever hearing loss you have and make it sound ideally like whatever the source was. What are your thoughts on all of that stuff? Because I think it's related.
Well, hearing aids, or using tones, I always worry, especially for people who have hearing loss, that what you're doing is you're actually increasing the SPL that's being applied and accelerating the rate of hearing loss. Now, I'm not an audiologist, and I do not know that that's a thing, but my gut instinct on those is I do worry a little bit that when people are using those as a way to correct for hearing loss, that they may be damaging their hearing. The first part of the question was ear canal. I have a very unusual ear canal. Mine is kind of vertical and has a hard angle in it, so it was almost impossible in the early days for me to get a custom in-ear monitor fit. I had to send it back like 5 different times. And from a physics or fit perspective for the IEM guys, that's always a bit of a challenge. But acoustically, I think this is a big unknown, and I've never seen research around this, and maybe someone else has and can correct me, but we just simply make the assumption that we can't completely correct for somebody's pinna or ear canal, but neither does a concert hall. Any external wave that's coming into the system is going to be affected by that, and my belief is that if you are able to give people tones that they perceive as linear, that what's happening is your neurology is compensating for the differences in your pinna and your ear canal structure to more or less perceive the same thing someone else is perceiving. but I don't know that research has been done on that, and I haven't even had a real conversation about that with anyone else. So that's just an idea, maybe a new one or a bad one or a good one or an old one. I don't know.
Then one thing that you have a difference between headphone and concert hall. The headphone creates a closed volume and with an exciter, so the resonances in this with the ear canal are very different for each person. There is research that Sean Olive has done at Harman, where they literally measured this, and that is certainly something where you do have a difference between the situation of a headphone and an open hall like this. And realistically, there's no way to compensate for it, and this is why people have often very strong preferences for headphones, and headphones that I put on and say, yeah, that sounds right to me. Somebody else puts on and says, oh, you've got tinnitus, you can't see it, that's awful.
Yeah, I just am not sure that DSP is going to really resolve that in any sense.
I don't think it can. I don't think it can.
Yeah. So and that comes down to so there's no question that the acoustic impedance changes a lot, and this affects what the IEM guys do particularly, but it doesn't affect the headphones as much because we're external to the system. But the acoustic impedance of the ear canal varies a lot, and that's a science area we haven't even really looked into too much yet because we haven't done too much with IEMs. I don't know if you guys have. Yeah, Sean, too bad to not have Sean Olive on the panel for that one.
Yeah, that
was his wheelhouse.
Yeah. So, and the other thing you've asked about using the tones. Now there are a number of systems. I find those just personally interesting. It's not something that we're looking into building at some point in time, but I've looked at those and I've actually attempted to understand how those systems work. And obviously, as I follow closely what Sean Olive does, I understand a lot more about what we need to do to equalize headphones and where we actually just have to give up because it's next to impossible to do. And honestly, I have very grave doubts about the results of those systems. They all seem to me green table assumptions where somebody said, hey, I've got this idea, I think this will work, they implement it. And again, like our measurements, without actually having done the proper audible testing with large groups of people to show, yes, it actually makes the correct correction, this is marketed. So to me, it is more a marketing gizmo than actually something that is backed by science. The only really large-scale studies I know is Olive Welty at Harman. And if anybody else knows any, please tell me. It's something that I'm interested in.
That's really a hearing aid thing. And the problem with those gadgets is that you're used to, your brain is filtering it from the normal world, right? So it's trying to make a filter that works right in the normal world. If you compensate for it temporarily, it'll be too bright. Hearing aids are in your ears 24/7, so they can give you back those frequencies and your brain adjusts for it after a while and it's fine. But if it's a temporary gadget, you're mixing up your hearing loss with what you're used to hearing, because you're used to hearing things with the hearing loss, so it sounds normal. So it won't work unless it's in your ears 24/7, or most of the time. Because your brain will adapt. Because your brain will then go, okay.
Well, there's some hearing loss occurring right now.
Hi there. I do want to preface this by saying I'm an educator and an actor and a vocalist. And I've come to many of these trade shows because I know 2, 3, 4, a few people that are involved in this industry. And I have 2 questions. First of all, sort of connected to the last one, in that I want to know if you guys think that people actually hear differently. And that's why they may prefer this over that, or listening this way rather than that way. And the second question I have is because sometimes I hear you talk and I don't know the jargon, and you're speaking Greek, to me. But bottom line, and I'm sort of addressing this to everybody, but since you guys are up there, you have to answer. Does it all come down to it's all about the music? Is that what it still comes down to for you?
I'd say absolutely everyone does hear differently. I mean, just look at, like Dan was saying, the response to various headphones. There are people that there's a certain headphone company, they don't typically exhibit here, I'm not going to name them. You probably know who they are, but quite popular. And a lot of people really love them, but a lot of people here, you know, in the F.Y.I would be like, oh my God, I can't believe you listen to those and like them. But no, the people who listen to them, they aren't crazy. They actually really like that, and they think it's great, and they think it sounds real. So, and if you can take one of those headphones and put it up against Ether or, you know, something like that, and have people say, oh, they sound the same, that's funny. You know,
or congratulations, you just saved a lot of money.
Yeah. But you know, if people think 2 amps sound the same, it's like, okay, you know, within the realm of reason. But people do hear differently, and yeah, for me, it's all about the music. And it's all about what, you know, what I like. You know, thank you. You know, what I like as well. And you know, I'm very vocal about, like, you know, what products I like from our line. That doesn't mean that they're forever. So,
yeah, I had an end user on Facebook, F.Y.I post one that I thought was actually a really interesting comment, and I'm still processing to think if it's right or not. But his comment was, you know, somebody was asking him to compare one of our headphones to another headphone, and the person said, I prefer the other headphone, but I have to say that I think there are 2 types of users in the world. There are people who listen and are always like trying to tease out every detail. And then there are people who are trying to immerse themselves in the experience. And there's a continuum, of course, in between those and all sorts of things. But his point was that, you know, this headphone that he preferred was much more in the teasing it apart for the micro details, and, you know, but that headphones, like he flagged us as one of the ones that's more experiential. You know, it's just a different way to listen. And people might be hearing the exact same thing, but what they care about and how they interpret the experience and what's emotionally or intellectually relevant to them can completely change what they're interested in hearing and what will sound right to them.
Different, objective, subjective. I am involved in musical theater, and there are people who just cannot hear, cannot properly detect pitch. And there are people who can go off pitch, and some percentage of the audience will just, and if somebody goes off key, I mean, I'm just, oh, it really hurts. And I'm starting to work on a music processor, not a sound processor. And I have the first part of it done. It's you know, we called it the gadget. It's not enough to release as a product. But what it does is it detunes music from A equals 440, or wherever it is, down to C equals 256. It's primarily for people who are classical music listeners, and it works for rock as well. And when you detune it, there's a certain point where you just go, ah. And that's not all people.
Yeah, some people don't hear it.
Yeah, some people do not hear it. Okay, I'd say probably 60–70% hear it.
Yep.
And we're going to do 2 more things that are, again, kind of subjective. And one of them is for the pop people. There's an expander, an intelligent expander. You know, these are all easy to do, but they're difficult to do, so they sound good. Yeah. And that's for the pop music crowd, because it has a dynamic range of 7 dB or something. And then the, if you're lucky, on a good day. And then the final thing, and this is, I don't know how to explain this simply, but there are, you know, music has a beat, you know, most of it, you know, jazz, you could argue. And there are singers who sing behind the beat, like Frank Sinatra does it. People will like them, they don't know why they like him, but it's because he's behind the beat. Up to the Exile on Main Street album, the Stones all were behind the beat. After the Exile on Main Street album, they were on the beat. And I've heard many times people come up to me and say, oh, I like the Stones until Exile on Main Street, and then after that, well, I don't know what happened, and blah, you know, they went commercial. And it's like, there's all these little psychoacoustic things that I'm going to put into this music processor. And it's an interesting thing to play with, and it has something for everybody there, and it's a lot of work. We have some really brave people.
And some people probably won't hear it.
All of them should hear some aspect of it.
But the reaction to the gadget was interesting, because I mean, I could hear the pitch shift, you know, when you turn it on and off, but there were a certain percentage of people who just couldn't hear it at all.
Yeah. And everybody's building, you know, every other kind of component, but nobody's really building a music processor. So hey, let's do it.
But we're doing hi-fi. I think what's important to understand is we each have our own unique, if we want to so call it, hardware for hearing, where then we get nerve impulses, they are processed by the brain. So absolutely there's a learned response to sound. When you've got a baby, they do not have a good response to sound. They cannot tell sounds apart. So it's very clear, we each have our unique signature of our hardware, and we then have our unique learned response to sound. And there are differences between cultures. There are differences in the tuning between certain cultures of the music, and this affects how we're hearing. So I think no two persons hear alike. I often joke, well, we should really work on direct nerve interfaces so we can cut out all of this crap of headphones, amps, this, that. But the truth is, it actually cannot work, because you would have to have the learned response to sound of another person to make that work. Or you would have to record your own response in a concert. That would work. Then you can play back. Then it will work. But you have to have been there. So I think everybody hears very, very individually. And once we realize that, then there's a totally different kind of worms open, which our friends at the AES won't like, because that means actually everybody is wrong or right with their equipment, what we're doing, and what sounds right to one person may sound wrong to another. Oh my God. Terrible. But I've got this meter and it points there and shows me I've got 0.005% THD. I'm gonna cry.
That's a great point, and fairly horrifying that actually, even if we could measure what matters, if it matters differently to everyone, oh God. Okay, so there you go.
So I actually have one from our YouTube live stream. Deserted Drake wants to know, will Loach ever return to the DIY scene?
Probably not. I mean, I still do some things just for myself to try things out, but I just don't have the time.
So I know this is something we've actually talked about before, Dan. How much does listener training, ear training, play into how and who you have listened to your products during development?
I have always found, I love people's input, good, bad, or indifferent. And I always like listening to it to see if somebody has been able to articulate the conditions under which they were able to arrive at their opinion. And then I can listen to it and I can say, I agree with that, or I disagree with it, or I think that's important, I don't think it's important. So I see a lot of that, but at the end of the day, there's such a huge variation in what people are looking for sonically. It's just all over the place. And that's part of the reason why I got into things like tuning kits and stuff, is because the presumption that what I think is the optimal condition for a given headphone is seldom what, might satisfy 40%. If I'm lucky, it might satisfy 50 or 60% of people who hear it. But if I put in a little bit of variation, plus or minus, from where I think is right, then I typically am able to incorporate, a larger audience and having a good experience. And as far as training goes, I feel like I'm a poster child for training. It takes a lot of listening, and I have to say that I don't think I understood Soundstage sonically in headphones for the first, all the way until I got into the Alpha Dogs. Soundstage was a concept in headphones and headspace. It just didn't really make sense to my mind, and I didn't hear it. And then there was one day when suddenly it was like a switch turned on, and my perception became different. And that was after, thousands of hours of listening
10,000.
and, tweaking, and maybe the 10,000.
No, John Curl says it takes 10,000 hours.
Yeah, it's a good book, and it may well have, but it was like once the light switch came on, it could never be undone, and now I hear things in a completely different way. And I know other people that that's happened to. I don't know. There are probably some virtuosos who have really adept hearing that's exactly cued into how headphones work and how the brain can optimize it, and they're that way from day one. And then there are probably people like me that take a long slog and suddenly the lights come on and you go, I hear this differently now.
French otolaryngologist by the name of Alfred Tomatis and the conscious ear and his work. Okay, just something to, I'm feeding that in the sphere for you. He passed away, but he did incredible work. His name, Tomatis, Tomatis. And he's got listening centers in the United States working with autism and all sorts of other things using listening. But that's not, my question is, a lot of people's hearing is really going. Do you have, when you test your stuff, do people go through hearing tests?
Oh, absolutely. It's like, and I mean, it's funny, I was testing my hearing way back, you know, when I was 18 and 19, just getting into this, and I know what I've lost to today, which is about 2K. You know, I can still hear about 17 and a half, which is fine. But you do lose your hearing over time. You want to preserve your hearing by not, you know, abusing it too much. One of the reasons I hate, concerts, rock concerts, is like, well, okay, here's your choice. You can wear earplugs and hear nothing, which you might as well stay home, or you can wreck your ears for 3 days, and who knows what the long-term damage is.
Custom fit earplugs, they exist. I've been wearing them for years, playing really loud guitar, going to loud shows.
And they work?
Yeah, because they're made so they don't filter all the highs out as much, so it's more balanced sounding. And they work pretty well, and my hearing's been
Yeah, there are a couple options for that.
Wait, but then I can't complain about going to concerts.
Jason's got you now.
Yeah, there you go.
So they do exist. You get your ears molded.
But yeah, I maintain that because lately I picked up a little bit of tinnitus and it went away, but it's like it's always worrisome whenever your hearing is not what it used to be.
Gentleman over here.
Hello. I was wondering, with the internet kind of maturing, I still feel like we're probably in the long term going to think this is still the Wild West ages of the internet, but it's already changed people's use cases and life with audio reproduction systems, desktop systems, portable audio, and all that stuff. Where do you see the future of your industry going in the next, let's say, 30 years?
Wow. 30 years.
Wow.
The way out. Let me go and get my crystal ball.
Wetware. Direct nerve induction will be a thing. I tell you today.
Okay, so I have one last from YouTube from Pietro Cosi Tinen. For Mike and Jason, is an overabundance of power for headphones for 2-channel the same as it is for headphones, where it's a added bonus?
Hard to tell. I mean, it's too general because it's like what works well with the headphones you're using. Having more power, if you can get the power without extra noise, it's not really going to hurt that much. It probably can't hurt that much. You're probably not going to run the headphones so hot you blow them up or anything like that. But more power usually comes with, you have to have more gain. It's usually more noise. That's the same with headphone and on the speaker side. So choose your battles. Do you want to use a lot of feedback, to actually get a low gain but high power amp, which you won't be able to drive into high power anyway. So it's difficult to answer that one.
Yeah, nothing clear cut.
Yeah.
Even digitally, I mean, you make something more powerful digitally, and it's trade-offs. I mean, you just need what you need. You can run digital filters until the numbers involved are below the, effective number of bits you have. It's there's overkill and necessary and underkill. And my comfortable margins are overkill plus about 10-20%.
That works, yeah. But in the end, I always say, look, listen for yourself, trust your own ears. Don't let somebody tell you what you should hear. If it sounds right to you, if it sounds good to you, it's good. If it's what I hate, it's still good for you. I won't listen to it. and make your choices on that. Don't let yourself be led by people that tell you, this will sound great. If it sounds great to you, it sounds great. Don't let me tell you what you should hear. Don't let anybody else tell you. Listen, trust your ears, train your ears, as Dan says. And maybe you come to a point when you realize what you've been listening to, those horrible red headphones with a white B on them. There comes a point when you listen to them and you suddenly realize, that's goddamn awful. And then maybe you buy something different.
And on that note, okay, all right, one more.
Wait, hold on. Wait for the mic.
All right, for each of you in your field that you make, headphones or amps or DACs, what's your favorite product that's not one that you make?
It's a trap. How about that's not made by anyone on the panel?
The old original fire screen quad electrostatic loudspeaker.
Tannoy Monitor Red, 15-inch, 300B amp, TDA 1541 DAC.
I'd have to go with my Cavalli liquid glass, just a tube rolling dream. Most fun amp.
I'd have to say Magnapan 0.7s.
I would say for me it's a microphone because I'm a big microphone geek. So it's a Neumann.
U87.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a nice one. Yeah.
Okay, and that said, we've come to the end of the seminar and actually the end of the show for the day. I just want to thank all of you for coming, and of course, all our panelists. If you have any more questions, this is your chance. Just ambush them on the way out. Thanks for coming.